Welcome to a forum on spirituality, your source of spiritual tools and wisdom from notable guests during these difficult times. Every week, a pioneer in spirituality will be interviewed, someone who's raised the level of consciousness of our community by examining spirit in their lives and sharing it with us. It's an honor to introduce Helen Farkas, born in 1920 in Romania. She and her family were deported to Auschwitz in 1944, where she was separated from her fiancé, Joe Farkas, and then lost her parents and extended family to the gas chambers. She, along with two of her sisters and a niece, barely survived the brutal winter months of forced labor, followed by camp evacuations known as the Death March, from which she daringly escaped. Her brutal experiences and escape are vividly described in her book, Remember the Holocaust. Helen demonstrated inner resourcefulness and strength that are testimony to human resilience. Her will to live and ability to love during those horrific times is truly inspirational. Helen talks to audiences in the thousands to reach as many people as possible with her message of tolerance and understanding so that a Holocaust never happens again. With Helen Farkas is her 20-year friend, mentor, supporter, and fan, Jim McGarry. Jim was a teacher in morality and social justice at St. Ignatius High School in San Francisco for 20 years, and he's been teaching religious studies at Mercy High School in San Francisco for the past 10 years, where he supports Helen's legacy as the director of the Farkas Center for the Study of the Holocaust. Jim organizes school assemblies with Holocaust survivors to teach students about conscience and morality. So kudos to Mr. McGarry for teaching his students to be upstanders, respecting the dignity of others. Thank you both for being here and joining me. And Jim, I want to thank you for supporting Helen and her mission and her message and her strength of character.
Oh, it's an honor, really.
And Helen, I would like to start by just giving you my condolences for your losses during the Holocaust. I know that was a horrific time in your past. And I know that there are some people that are not comfortable talking about the Holocaust, and they say that it makes them too upset, and they lost family members that were in the Holocaust. Now for you, I know that you like to talk about it, and you wrote a book about it. So how does that help you? And how does that help other people? And how do you think that prevents another Holocaust?
Well, to me, it became a mission. During the Holocaust, we often spoke about the possibility that we might survive. Of course, there was no proof of that it will happen. But all my life afterwards, after I was liberated, my wish and desire was to not only let the world know what happened to us, but also I want to teach tolerance. So I'm a teacher without a portfolio.
Well, I know I read in your book that you didn't really talk about the Holocaust experience until you were invited to speak at your daughter's school, huh?
People didn't want to listen. As often as I tried to explain and tried to tell even family that lived in America and live still back east, they did not want to listen. They said it's too upsetting, and most of the people that I started to talk in the first years, to tell you the truth, as far as I'm concerned, I say that it was Steven Spielberg's film that was shown all over the world that brought the attention, and that gave me an opportunity to be able to tell about the Holocaust, what it was like. And the pain, of course, nobody can feel the pain that I had lived with. I had a long life, and I'm still here and still hope to continue to teach tolerance, because tolerance is the only thing that can begin to help the people of this world to listen and to think that hatred and prejudice is not a good thing.
So how do you define tolerance?
you just find it, you have it, you do it. Just do it. That's tolerance. You don't right away take out a knife or a gun and shoot or beat up someone, because negotiate. God has given us brains. Negotiate and make it a better world. I believe that tikkun olam, which means to make a better world, to heal the world, that is the key to at least begin to be good people, because what we have experienced till now in the last let's say century is not good. It's not a good thing.
So you lived through a lot of viciousness and horror. What advice do you have for people in the present time that are, say, abused or battered or what have you? I mean, what advice could you give them to help them? I mean,
well, I just say that be tolerant and convince that person that you have something against, that they have no reason. You begin. First of all, I say we have to begin with the little children. I'm very glad to hear that now in schools they are going to, it's forbidden to bully each other. You know how many children have suffered? Even I myself, I was one of 9 children. My parents had 9 children. And even we bullied each other. And I didn't realize it then. So we have to teach our children to grow up with love in their hearts. And hate should be abolished. We have to turn around this world. We have to make it a better world for all.
and I know that this is some of the things that Jim teaches to his students, which is a good place to start. Now, when you were growing up, you had a wonderful, it sounded like in your book, I just loved your book,
Thank you.
Remember the Holocaust. And it sounded like you had a real close family and you were happy and you had community with your neighbors as well as with your family. So when you were deported, first to go to the ghetto and then to go to Auschwitz, to the camps, did you get any support from your neighbors? What happened to that community?
None whatsoever. First of all, the apathy was hurtful. Secondly, the laws that came out so much against helping a Jew. If you helped a Jew, you were a Jew, or you were being thrown to become a Jew. And many times I heard that there were non-Jews among us because they helped and they were caught. So people, it was wartime. Don't forget that people, they were gone, members of the family were gone in the war, and everything started to be a problem. To get food was a problem, to conduct your life that you did before without those people that have been gone from the home. All this influenced in some way. But as far as the Jews were concerned, even though they used to say, I have my own Jew, but nobody lifted a finger for us.
Do you think it was fear or they believed the propaganda?
Both. The propaganda took on very strongly, number one. Secondly, they were busy with their own life, and they just simply didn't seem to care.
So once you were a prisoner, you developed a spiritual connection with some of the other female prisoners, with all that you were going through. So I wanted you to talk a little bit about that community that you felt with the other prisoners, because many times in life, we hear in prisoners that prisoners are beating each other up and fighting over different things. But you didn't do that, so...
No, we were very patriotic about that, or how shall I say. We helped each other. We became like one family. So whenever one was in trouble, especially during the, it was more visible during the death march, when we knew that on the end, if you can't go, you're being shot to death. We were always helping. If somebody was in trouble, somebody came and helped. Like we had Irene, my niece, who had an affliction with her leg. It's a long story how lucky she was that altogether that she was
well, I know you saved her leg. I mean, you saved her
leg.
Life along with some of
Yes.
the others, because you would make a commotion or fall down or something to get the attention off of her, and then you'd get beaten for it.
We did whatever we could to help each other, but especially when there was the four of us together, 3 sisters and a niece.
But that was wonderful that the sisters were able to stay together.
That was why we suffered even more than being hungry, being cold, being hot, you name it. The fear. You know, I'm not even mentioning how terribly hungry. You know, when you're hungry, you are capable of doing anything. I even heard or read about after the war that men were even eating each other's, the dead. They were cutting pieces. Well, it's very hard to believe, but the same way, the so to speak, small things that I mentioned, what happened to us, it was life-saving at times. But still, it comes to me sometimes now that was this really happening? Was this a nightmare? Was this a bad dream? It's so hard to believe the things that were happening, but we were always there for each other.
Well, most of us in this country, the only thing we know about hunger is if we're on a diet or something, you know. But to think that you were eating bread made with sawdust and trying to eat grass and...
Hunger is a terrible pain. It hurts. It hurts so badly. And continuously, you know, when you're hungry continuously. When I speak to youngsters in school and I mention the hunger, I say, have you ever been hungry? Then one would say, yes, I was. I forgot my lunch. One time I was hungry. It's not the same. When you're hungry continuously, it is so hurtful. And the fear. This is one thing that I don't even think I wrote enough in my book. How fearful it was every day, every minute of the day, how fearful it was. Will you be here 5 minutes from now?
And yet you also had these instincts that you acted on so quickly and with certainty. And this is how you saved your niece's life, you saved your brother's life, your sister's life. Jim, you've been around Helen enough. Where do you think she gets these instincts that she's so confident about that she can just act like with her escape?
It's a good question I don't know the answer to, except that that's the Helen I know. And as a teacher, I'd love to, you know, be able to bottle it and present it to my students. So the best I can do is present Helen, you know. I think there's something about solidarity that is a natural instinct of hers or a practice of hers, perhaps from her early family. I love the story about even when they were ghettoized in Satmar, her hometown, she immediately looked around and saw these kids had nothing to do, right? They weren't in school. And what did you do?
Well, I gathered up a bunch of kids after I finished my chores, and we just went and hymenached around the streets, you know, because we were surrounded with the barbed wires. We couldn't go out anywhere. So we sang, we read, we told jokes to each other, and we cried a little, and somehow or other we persevered. I have
You sort of
problems with the language sometimes.
You distracted them. You distracted them.
Yes. Yes, and I gave a chance to the mothers to deal with food, with cleanliness, with 4 or 5 families in the ghetto, and a place where one family lived before. Those mothers were very busy, and the children were under the feet. So get them away. There was no place to go but up and down the streets, So wherever we were, we had to persevere. We just had to be. We had to do.
And then I know too,
choices we didn't have much. Sorry.
And then when you went to the camps and you were separated from your parents and your sister's little boy that was about 2 years old.
Yes.
Now, you were a great support to your sister, but that was just a devastating experience.
Yes, it was, and my sister never got over it. The 2 of us came home, and she just never recovered. Her husband was in forced labor camp from 1942, when the baby was still, the baby was actually born in 42. And I think he came home once, I remember. I don't know if it was more times. And then he went away, and we never knew about him. We never. And she raised that baby by herself, and they were very much in love for many years. They went steady till finally they were able to get married and have this little child. And then it just melted away, There were no choices. We just had to live our lives the way it happened. And
so what would you say were life lessons that you might have learned from some of this tragedy?
I think that the lesson is right there in recent history. This is the lesson that Nazism was the way I see it. Nazism was Hitler decided that first Deutschland überall, which means Germany all over, to occupy the lands around Germany. He wasn't even German, he was Austrian. But the people were bitter after the First World War because there were no jobs, and the whole world was depressed for a while. When the American stock market crashed and all that. But this Nazism was just a flare-up. It just went like wildfire. And it was because his doctrine was so accepted. His doctrine was to separate the peoples, the nations, to depress the nations. That's how he was able to flourish, and to categorize. For instance, the Jews were subhumans. We were subhumans, and therefore we had no right to exist. Now I ask you, what kind of world was that? We had enough to learn just from recent history. It's time for us to see that people are people. We all have that little spark of consciousness, and therefore through that we're all tied together, no matter what color of our skin, the clothes we wear, the ideas we have. That's why we're all one nation.
Recently I watched something called Night Fog. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Didn't.
Well, it's a film of what happened in the concentration camps, and it shows it's pretty awful. They don't edit it or anything, but you could see the way that they treated the prisoners and the people that they'd killed and so forth. Like you said, they didn't treat them like they were human. They totally dehumanized them. They had no,
Totally.
yeah, that took away their dignity and everything by shaving their heads, taking their clothes off, shoveling them in a pit. It was...
Imagine, let's say myself, I was a 23-year-old young woman ready to be married. I was quite good looking.
You still are.
Then, thank you. Then I end up in Auschwitz. They take away not even my last clothes of my skin, but my hair. Even my hair, from all over where I grew hair on my body, it was taken. Not once, but twice during that 1 year that I spent. So not only did I not have a choice, but how did I feel when in my own hometown I'm being put into a ghetto? I'm an innocent, I mean, we were a family, we worked hard, we had our own home, our own garden. We worked hard and we were honest people, law-abiding people. Why, how could this happen? How did the world allow this? My father lived for 40 years in America, and he came back to get my mother to bring her to America because there was going to be a war. That was First World War. He went back, he was drafted in the Hungarian-Austrian army. He could not return because he wasn't a citizen yet. But all my life I heard about America. So now, when we were at home and we were run over by Nazism, my father was able, although we had to serve in our radios, they were confiscated. Jews could not have radios. My young brother had a little radio and he didn't give it in. He took a chance. My father was able, since we had our own home, he was able to go out down in the basement and listen to the voice of America. Now, all these atrocities were happening. All these atrocities slowly came out because they found mass graves with hundreds and hundreds of Jewish people, men, women, and children murdered. And when my father used to come up from the basement with these horrors, with these horror stories, we begged him, don't listen to it, it's all American propaganda. Don't listen to it, it's not true. The world would not allow this to happen. And you see, the world allowed it to happen. It did happen.
And there was so much horror that happened, and yet, just quickly, I wanted to bring up the story about the Nazi prisoner.
After the war, yes, in the beginning I was a little bit bitter. And my daughter reminded me just recently, she said, Mom, I remember that you said you never want to go back to Satmar, my hometown. You said you never want to go to Germany. And I said, and we did. Because as you get older, you come to realize, and especially after a decade or two, who do you blame now? Those who committed the crimes are no longer around. It's their children. I feel sorry for the German people. I feel sorry because they have to live with the shame that what their grandparents and parents have done.
Their ancestors did. But anyway, I wanted to just acknowledge that when you had an opportunity with this prisoner, that you and your sister basically just turned and walked out, and you didn't do anything. And you've handled so. I also wanted to know how this affected you spiritually, this whole experience. If you could quickly just tell us that.
That is actually my spirituality. That from the very beginning, even through all the horrors that we have gone through, we remained ourselves who we were before. It did not affect us. It did. I say that, yes, I was a little bit bitter, but it did not affect me. I remained the same person who I was before. And yet, even more so, because now as I became older and older, I realized how much we are one people and we have one earth. There's only once in a lifetime a life and an earth. it's our responsibility, and I feel it like it's my responsibility to talk and talk till I get blue in the face, because in the schools I see the students, how they treat me and what kind of letters I get, what the response is.
It's just such a beautiful lesson. I want to thank you so much for just being who you are, for your strength of character and getting this message out, and hopefully that this will never repeat itself again in history. And Jim, thank you so much for what you do to support Helen in her messages and in her mission and her strength.
It's a labor of love.
Yes.
He has been one of the first teachers that I have met who took it so seriously, and he spread the world, the schools for me, you know. He takes me places to schools, and he schleps me, I say, and he's just wonderful. He really deserves a big.
And I think the reason that you're the way that you are is because you really do have a life's purpose. So thank you so much.
Thank
and
you.
I just would like to say that Helen Farkas is a spiritual ambassador for peace. And we have much to learn from her courage in transforming the horrific experience of the Holocaust into one of love and forgiveness by letting go of hatred and victimization. Now, Helen's inspirational story reminds us to be grateful to be living in an era where we have more opportunity to live a spiritually fulfilling life. So let's learn from the heroes of our history and not repeat the mistakes and atrocities of the past by evolving into community anchored in sharing, giving, and loving one another. And let's support Helen's legacy along with her family and Jim McGarry by living Helen's message and setting the example for our next generation.
Thank you, Vicki. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you for joining us. I hope you'll be inspired to live more fully by learning how others approach spiritual experiences, helping each of us with our own spiritual path. If you feel a spiritual connection, enjoy and share it with all of creation. And we'll see you next time on a forum on spirituality where the Spirit lives on. Please visit me, Vicki Saputo, at drsaputo.com to learn more about integrating body, mind, emotion, and spirit. If you've enjoyed the show and would like to see our archives and learn more about this program, go to aforumonspirituality.com.